Most often we hear about wars that lasted several years, forgetting that it can last not only a few years, months or weeks, but also a few days or even a few minutes. In this selection I have chosen the shortest wars recorded in history. On the 19th of March 1982, Argentine scrap metal workers illegally arrived at Leith Harbor, South Georgia, on board the transport ship Era Bahia Buen Suceso and raised the Argentine flag. This move led to a brief, but bitter conflict on the Falkland Islands, a remote United Kingdom's colony in the South Atlantic. After 10 weeks, on June 14th, the British forces had the Argentinians surrounded on land and barred at sea. During these 10 weeks, the British suffered 258 casualties and 777 wounded, while the Argentinians suffered 649 casualties, 1068 wounded, and 11,313 captured. Depending on which side is telling the story, the Polish-Lithuanian War in 1920 ranges in length. According to the Polish, the war only consisted of the fight for the Suwałki region, which took place from September to October of 1920 as part of the Polish-Soviet War. The Lithuanians, on the other hand, argue that the war was fought from the spring of 1919 until November of 1920 as part of their war for independence. The aftermath of this war saw an uneasy armistice between the two countries in October, followed by a break in diplomatic relations after the events and ceasefire in November. Treaty of Bucharest, settlement, signed on August 10, 1913, that ended the Second Balkan War, in which Bulgaria was defeated by the combined forces of Serbia, Greece, and Romania. Bulgaria had unsuccessfully contested the distribution by its former allies of territory taken from the Turks during the First Balkan War. According to the terms of the treaty, Bulgaria was granted a small portion of Macedonia and a strip of Aegean coastline including the port of Didiagic. Serbia took northern and central Macedonia, Greece acquired southern Macedonia, and Romania was given southern Dobruja. Known by a number of other names, including the 30 Days War, the Black, 97, and the Unfortunate War, the Greco-Turkish War was fought between the Kingdom of Greece and the Ottoman Empire. The combatants' immediate concerns were for the possession of Crete, which was then under Ottoman Turkish rule yet considered itself Greek. Taking place beginning on April 5, 1897, the Greco-Turkish War did not last very long. In the end, the Ottoman Empire came through with a decisive military victory, and took parts of Thessaly from Greece as well. However, through diplomacy and the intervention of other European nations, Crete was later given autonomy. The war between the two communist neighbors broke out in the early hours of February 17, 1979, when China launched a full-scale military invasion into Vietnam's northernmost provinces. Though the skirmish lasted only 27 days, the devastation it caused was colossal. Casualty figures are still in doubt, as they have never been released by either Beijing or Hanoi. Some have estimated that Chinese casualties ranged anywhere between 21,000 and 63,000. It is also thought that tens of thousands of Vietnamese died and suffered, most of them civilians, because the war was fought exclusively on Vietnamese soil. The Georgian-Armenian War of 1918 took place between the Democratic Republic of Georgia and the First Republic of Armenia over the border territories of Lori, Javakheti, and Burshalo. Georgian-Armenian relations had already been strained since the time of Russian dominance in the region before the Russian Empire had been overthrown in the Russian Revolution. On December 5, Armenian troops moved into Burshalo, and 2 days later war was declared. Both the Armenians and the Georgians living in the borderlands suffered from both of the invading armies, and the war lasted until December 31, when both sides finally agreed to a British-mediated ceasefire. In the end, the disputed land of Lori became a neutral zone, which was later divvied between the countries when they were Sovietized. On November 14, 1885, the Kingdom of Serbia declared war on the Principality of Bulgaria. Although the Bulgarians had a younger, less experienced army, they did not suffer as much division amongst themselves. War was not a popular option in Serbia, but Serbian King Milan mobilized his army anyway, as he was expecting a quick victory. The Serbs expected to occupy Sofia, the capital of Bulgaria, but after suffering a decisive defeat at Slivnica, they started retreating. They retreated until November 28, when Austria-Hungary stepped in and threatened Bulgaria with military action if it did not stop its own advances. Winning the war did much to further reinforce the patriotism of the Bulgarians, further solidifying the nationalist bonds of their recent unification. One of several conflicts between the two nations since the partition of British India following World War I, the Indo-Pakistani War of 1971 took place during the same time as the Bangladeshi Liberation War in 1971. This occurred when India supported separatists in East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, who were engaged in a civil war and fighting for their autonomy. On December 3, as a preemptive attack, Pakistan launched airstrikes on multiple Indian airbases, which led to India joining the civil war. Quickly outnumbered and outmaneuvered, the war came to an end on December 16, when Pakistan signed the Instrument of Surrender, which marked the separation of East Pakistan and the birth of Bangladesh as a new nation. However, as a result of the fighting and violence, millions of civilians were killed, injured, or displaced. Even today, tensions remain high along the Indo-Pakistani border. In fact, even well before the partition and independence of British India, religious and ethnic strife had become well entrenched between the predominantly Hindu populations of what is now India, the predominantly Muslim populations of what is now Pakistan, and the ethnically Bengali, religiously Muslim populations of what is now Bangladesh. The Six-Day Way took place between June 5 and June 10 in 1967, when tensions boiled over and Israel nearly wiped out the Egyptian Air Force by way of preemptive attacks. The war took place on three fronts. Namely, these were the Egyptian Front, the Syrian Front, and the Jordanian Front. The United Nations immediately began working on ceasefire resolutions to the war as soon as the Israeli army had started to advance, and by the time all of the concerned parties had signed the ceasefire, Israel had captured the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights, and the West Bank. The Anglo-Zanzibar 1896 War is known as the shortest war in the history of the world, and sources differ on the length of the war, putting it at either 38 minutes, 40 minutes or 43 minutes, according to the UK Historical Association. On August 25, 1896, 2 days before the war commenced, the Sultan of Zanzibar had died, and his cousin, Khalid bin Barghash, took over the throne. This was despite a treaty that had said all successors had to be British approved prior to their ascension to the throne. The British saw this violation as a proclamation of war, and gave Khalid until 9 a.m. to surrender the throne. Khalid barricaded himself inside his palace, not believing the British would open fire. The British called his bluff, and the palace was decimated. By the time the shelling stopped around 9:45 a.m., over 500 Zanzibaris were either killed or injured, and Khalid had fled from the palace to the German consulate. Zanzibar would remain a British protectorate until becoming the People's Republic of Zanzibar in 1964, merging with the also newly independent United Republic of Tanzania later that year.